Good afternoon to everyone, those who are in the room and those who are online. We continue our seminar series called New Perspectives on Russia and Eurasia. And today we have a very distinguished guest, Andrei Yakovlev, who is in the process of moving from Russia to the United States via Turkey and make a stopover here in Helsinki. Andrei is one of the leading experts on Russia's political economy. For a number of years, he was a leader in Institute of Industrial and Market Studies and Institute for Study of Institutions and Development in the High School of Economics, published extensively in leading international journals, conducted quite a number of research, and his presentation today is a sort of summary of his analysis and observations, varieties of capitalism. Which model did Russia choose? Without further ado, Andrei, the floor is yours.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I'm really very glad to be here. Last time, I think it was maybe 10 years ago at another old building, yeah. So, and I would be really very grateful for any comments, remarks, because it is a work in progress. Actually, first version of this paper was prepared approximately 1 year ago, and it was written actually in our environment before the war, but of course I will provide some additional comments concerning new situation after the start of war. Moving to a theoretical framework, no, actually, Vladimir already told that it is about political economy, and for me, it is this paper and this presentation is some kind of follow-up of previous research with idea to understand not only the development of Russian society, the Russian economy, but also the place of Russian economic system in some kind of broader context. And here I try to show some lines of previous research. No, maybe I will start from comparative economics because maybe it is the closest one. Yeah, starting from many projects about comparison of Soviet plan economy and market economies in Europe and in US, with some kind of switch to in the focus to the analysis of differences in economic development of different transition countries. And it is now about comparative economics. But at the same time, another important line of research, it is legal origins theory, developed mostly by such people like Schleifer, Glaser, Laporte, Vishne, and it is not about former socialist countries, it is about much broader issue of development of market economies in the world. With some kind of key idea to compare differences between countries with different legal systems. First of all, between English common law and French civil law systems. But in my view, maybe more interesting and maybe in some sense more relevant for current situation is a third line of research linked to the concept of variety of capitalism. It is part of international political economy, represented mostly by people from political science, but also by some economists. Because, for instance, this line of legal origins theory was represented mostly by economists. So this concept of variety of capitalism first time was presented in a quite famous book edited by Lomonosow-University and published, I think, in 2000 or 2001. And in this book, only two basic models were proposed, liberal market economies and coordinated market economies. And the focus of this book was only about developed countries. Now here you can see some kind of very simple description of differences between two models. Important point is that it is not only about economic institutions, but also about many other important aspects of organization of economy and organization of also society. Note that this diagram on left side, you can see groups of countries. In one group, you can see US, UK, Canada, and Australia with much higher proportion of stock market capitalization to GDP, and at the same time with much lower protection of employees. And another group is represented mostly by European countries, including France, Germany, Denmark, and many others, and also Japan. Important point here is that Lomonosow-University and their co-authors studied the development of these models during decades, especially after the Second World War. But it was quite clear already at the time of publishing of this book that in 80s and 90s, we could observe some changes between these two models with quite clear expansion of liberal market economies in framework of globalization, and also with some internal changes of coordinated market economies. This concept was supported by quite many political scientists on one hand, but at the same time, it was a lot of critical arguments. First of all, due to strong focus of this variety of capitalism concept only on developed market economies. And therefore, it was quite understandable that in quite few years, we could observe some extension of this approach to other countries, including, first of all, Eastern Europe, because it was exactly the time of active transition. And it was a question for many scholars about the development path of this country, these countries. But at the same time, it was a number of papers about Latin America and about large emerging economies, including China and India. Main results of this second generation of studies about variety of capitalism can be described in the following way. First of all, concerning Eastern Europe. On one hand, it was clear that relevant countries try to follow the model of, in some cases, liberal market economies, in other cases, coordinated market economies, but practically all these countries, including larger like Poland or even smaller like Slovakia and Slovenia and so on, had some specific features, including, first of all, the control of main assets, economic assets in these economies by international actors. No, it was simply due to a lack of capital in these countries, and also due to, especially in Hungary, was maybe the most impressive example, the policy of government with very broad openness to foreign direct investment. Yeah, exactly with idea to attract capital, to increase efficiency of these economies and to push economic development. And on one hand, it was so really, and for instance, especially in the case of Hungary, already in late 90s, we could see quite high economic growth, also in manufacturing industry like electronics. So it was really quite impressive. But exactly this point about the control of these enterprises, national enterprises, privatized this time and controlled already by global companies, mostly from Europe, but also from US in some cases. In the time of high economic growth, in some sense, in good times, yeah, it was quite good. But in the time of crisis, and especially in 2008-2009 crisis, it became clear that the policy of these global players controlling these new assets in East European countries, in some sense, no, maybe it was not opportunistic, it was quite rational, but they tried to follow their own interests. Also, maybe related to national interests of their home countries. For instance, it was not only about the situation during the crisis of 2009, because such large companies global companies try to support, first of all, their home economies. And therefore, it was quite clear capital outflow from East European countries and some other similar things. But it was also about some choice of location of production facilities, because first of all, this interest of global corporations in entering East European markets in, for instance, early 90s, mid 90s, even late 90s, was explained by differences in salaries. For instance, in Czech Republic, in Hungary, the level of salaries in mid or late 90s was 4, 5, in some cases even 10 times lower compared to Germany. And it was clearly beneficial for German or maybe Austrian companies to move production facilities to neighbor countries. But after stabilizing economic and political situation, for instance, in Balkan countries like Bulgaria or Romania, the same companies started to move production facilities already from Hungary, for instance, to these countries. And the problem for these East European economies was that privatization under foreign control really led to improvement in technical efficiency of relevant production facilities. But at the same time, some important competences like research and development, design, overall governance in global value chains was kept by global offices of these companies. And in some sense, yes, it was increase in salaries, it was increase in production, but national actors, both governments and business, in some sense lost the control on the situation in their economies. Now, and it was especially dangerous and led to some serious consequences, even in political terms, in time of crisis. No, and for instance, this development observed during the last 15 or approximately 20 years in Hungary, at least partially can be explained by this dissatisfaction of ordinary people, by the effects of economic policy realized in 90s. So in any case, this type of market economies finally was defined as dependent market economies, exactly due to this key aspect related to the control of main economic assets by global players. At the same time, it was studies about the market economies in Latin America, in Middle East, and also in former Soviet Union. Here, relevant scholars stressed some another specific features of these economies, like this hierarchical structure in the case of Latin American economies, or with clientelism and patrimonial relations in the case of Middle East and former Soviet Union. But some kind of common things for all these models can be described exactly in terms of dependency, because it was not only for Eastern European countries. Maybe in the case of Eastern European countries, it was the most clear evidence due to this foreign control. In the case of patrimonial market economies or hierarchical market economies, maybe it was not so strong. But in any case, all these market economies finally were dependent on global players coming from liberal market economies, coordinated market economies, or from third type of countries, including large emerging economies like China, India, in some cases Brazil, South Africa, which try to create very often a specific model called by scholars state-permeated market economies. It is not about state capitalism, because very often there is no direct state ownership. But the idea is that in these economies, government played a much higher role, especially in the context of, in comparison to overall idea of liberalization, globalization, broadly supported in the 90s. And this higher influence of government led not only to some specific industrial policy and some preferences for some sectors, but also it led to stronger bargaining positions of national economic actors in their conversations with global companies and also with governments of developed countries. Now, maybe the most impressive case of this type is China, but also it is about India and also about some other large developing countries. At the same time, interesting and important point is that, not at least in the case of China, but now we can see similar trends also in India and also in Brazil and also in South Africa. Such type of economic development and some preferences for this type of economic model very often was linked with absence or at least limitation of political competition and democracy. Important point is that exactly this type of market economies, these state-permitted market economies, during the crisis of 2000-2009, could demonstrate a much higher level of stability. And after that, they also could develop relatively successful. And therefore, in academic community and also in some political circles, this model started to be perceived as alternative to liberal market economies and coordinated market economies, not only from economic but also from political point of view. Okay, it is some kind of overall picture with the idea to show that yes, there is really a variety of models, But if we will talk about real competition, in my view, we should analyze, first of all, these three models marked by blue, because all these models related to last part of this diagram described as dependent market economies, they didn't provide a real alternative. And at the same time, these three other models can be considered as some alternatives. No? And for instance, if we are talking about liberal and coordinated market economies, these differences were stressed already by Holosowskis and their co-authors. And during last 15 or 20 years, it became clear that state-permeated market economies, it is a real alternative to our models. First of all, in terms of opportunities for economic development. Okay, now about the place of Russia in this system of coordinates. Now, first of all, I should stress that it was not so much, but some papers following this approach, variety of capitalism, and analyzing Russia. Now, I mentioned here, especially this paper of Becker and Vasilyev, but also paper of Shederik and authors. Becker and Vasilyev was exactly about Russia. Shederik and authors wrote about broader group of large emerging countries, but including Russia. Their conclusions was that with all state captures in clientelism, we can see in Russia only patrimonial capitalism and no more. In my view, on one hand, yes, it's so. We have clear evidence of such things, but maybe it is related not only to only these papers about Russia, but maybe to overall approach, because this approach, at least till now, could not explain clearly transition between models. No, for instance, I provide here one concrete example of South Korea. We all know about economic miracle of South Korea in 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on. And it was, I think, the example which is very close to the state-permeated market economy. But it's necessary to stress that in 50s, before this military coup, student revolution, and so on, we could see in South Korea extremely corrupted economy, in some sense very similar to Russia of 90s. This approach of variety of capitalism, at least till now, focusing on some power dependency, on importance of existing institutions in different fields, not only in the economy itself, but also in education, in financial markets, in relations between trade unions and big companies, and so on. Also on relations between political elite and economic elite, didn't explain such changes between models. Yeah. And especially if we will talk about transition economies, the very specificity, in my view, was that they were not market economies before. No, of course, if we will talk about Eastern Europe, yes, in 20s or 30s of 20th century, they were market economies. But afterward, it was quite long time period of planning economy. And at the start of reforms in late 80s or early 90s, elites in these countries could make some choice for one model or another model, with some failures or successes. Exactly such approach I try to apply for analysis of Russia. And in my view, during last 30 years, we can define 3 different time periods with orientation of Russian elites on different models. Oh, and here at this table, I try to describe it very shortly, but later I will provide more explanations. First period, it is about 90s and early 2000s, with liberal market economy as a target model, but the final outcome as dependent market economy. Second stage and second time period, it is between 2004 and 2011, with some attempts of Russian elites to create or construct in Russia state-permeated market economy. But again, with the same outcome in the form of dependent market economy. No, and after 2012, it was some search for alternative with much lower dependence on external influences, some key characteristics of this of policy in this time period. Concerning 90s and early 2000s, in my view, there were 2 sub-periods. Because in 90s, under all these declarations about move to liberal market economy, trade openness, integration of Russia in global markets, and so on, state and government were very weak. State was not able to control rent-seeking interest groups. And therefore, with all integration of Russia in a global market, and also with control on main national assets in hands of national actors, because yes, it was privatization, and it was entry of some foreign and global companies, but they could not obtain control on key assets. Nevertheless, it was, in any case, some type of dependent market economy. And it was clearly recognized already in the late 90s. And these reforms initiated by Putin in his first presidential term in early 2000s was linked to some attempt to move forward in this model of liberal market economy, and to become less dependent on global players. It was possible due to strengthening of state on one hand, and clearly quite high public support for new government, new president, also due to some consolidation of main elite groups after the crisis of 98, yeah, especially during this all discussions and bargaining between elite groups in 99. But this attempt failed due to a new conflict between oligarchs and bureaucracy on the control of natural lands in 2002-2003, realized finally in USSR. At the same time, this much more consistent policy implemented in early 2000s with idea to create in Russia liberal market economy showed some internal limitations of this model, because during these years of high economic growth, under liberal conditions, under conditions of liberal policy, government started to face some political problems due to increase in inequality. because under liberal policy, it is quite obvious to see that more advanced sectors or more advanced regions or more advanced social groups get some additional opportunities. And therefore, and it became visible already in 2003, 2002, 2003, in my view, because on one hand, yes, it was high economic growth. It was beneficial for all social groups. But at the same time, more prosperous regions, more prosperous social groups benefited more. And this situation created some social tensions. And government needed some additional resources to respond on these tensions. And therefore, in my view, it was not only some kind of change of policy orientation and change in the preferences concerning the model of market economy. They were related not only to these internal conflicts between oligarchs and bureaucracy and so on, but it was also some consequence of internal limitations of liberal market economy model. Because if you will consider in broader contexts economic development, actually, yes, liberal market economies could be quite successful if they, also in terms of competition with other models, if they are already at high level of development. But in the history, it was practically no examples of catch-up development based on fully liberal economic policy. It was some attempt to do this in Chile, but with quite contradictory results, especially if you will consider the time period of Pinochet. And it's interesting that a main economic success of Chile, for instance, in the 90s, were related mostly to very non-traditional economic and, first of all, industrial policy implemented in 80s. After a very deep financial crisis of 81, 82. So, no, in my view, again, we had in 2002, 2003, quite a serious conflict between oligarchs and bureaucracy, it's clear. But at the same time, this attempt to implement in full scale this liberal market economy model for catch-up development was not successful, also due to internal limitations of this model, if we are talking about catch-up development. And of course, it was quite important goal for Russia and also for many other developing countries. In any case, after Yugos affair, we could quite serious switch to another model. And in my view, it was about state-permeated market economy. No, in terms of some indicators, it was replacement of government with appointment of Fratkov to a position of prime minister, but not too many key ministers were changed. Yeah, for instance, Gref was before and was after, but policy changed quite significantly, and it was clearly some focus on active industrial policy with all these state corporations, big construction works in Sochi, Vladivostok, creation of development banks, investment fund, and so on. And in my view, it was more or less in line with the experience of, first of all, East Asian countries. And it is not only about China, but for instance, Lee Kuan Yew from Singapore was very well welcomed in these years in Moscow, where he was invited many times by Gref and by some other Russian reformers of his time. However, this policy also failed. And no, it's possible to discuss many reasons for it, but in my view, key reason for the failure of this policy was in the quality of Russian elites. Because if we again will consider a successful experience of catch-up development in the world, it was not so many cases, yeah, but in all cases, usually relevant countries faced very serious challenges and very serious pressure from below, for instance, from population, or from some kind of external actors. For instance, if you will talk about South Korea, it was not only about protests of students and many other groups against very corrupted regime of Lee Hsien-man in the 50s, but it was also a very serious challenge provided at this time point by North Korea, because in 1960, per capita GDP in North Korea was twice higher comparing to South Korea. And for South Korean elite, after this student revolution, it became clear, and actually these students asked directly about unification with North Korea. And these elites understood that if they will not change something in their behavior, yeah, and in their policies, they will lose anything. So, some kind of consolidation of elite and the ability of elites in these countries to follow not only their own interests, but to follow some kind of national interests, yeah, was quite important precondition for implementation of such kind of policy. And in my view, it is also quite important aspect of all these success stories related to state-permeated market economies. For instance, it is also the story of China, in my view. And it was exactly not the story of Russia. And here I provide two citations from the book of military training. It was published before the war in summer of 2021. It is in Russian. Here, I suppose, for all people, it's not necessary to translate. But I would stress that, yes, training for many years was director of Carnegie Center in Moscow, but after February of this year, practically all the senior scholars of Carnegie Center left the country, and training is in the country, and he supported the war. So he's really some kind of representative of this elite, yeah. But such kind of extremely skeptical assessment of the quality of elite, in my view, is quite impressive, especially because it is not from some person representing a position. Yeah. It is about quite loyal expert working for the Kremlin for many years. Nevertheless, concerning some kind of sub-periods in this attempt to create a state-permeated market economy, it was quite short period of very high hopes between 2004 and 2008. Really with quite serious investments, because again, all these ideas about state corporations, investment fund, and so on, were not only about sleeping assets, because of course these people tried to have something for their own, but they also tried to think about development of countries. It's true. But at the same time, it was interesting that already, I think in 2006, key experts worked for the Kremlin could show that if a ruling elite is talking about real catch-up, it's necessary to restrict their own appetites and their own interests and their own assets and so on. These people were not ready to do it. And even in this time period, this concept of energy superpower, in my opinion, is quite symptomatic, because it was quite a rational choice of ruling elite. Even in these conditions of high economic boom, huge amount of rent provided due to high oil prices and so on. not to change seriously the structure of economy. And it was the choice for a model of some kind of mutual dependency between Russia as provider of energy and our raw materials for the West, in exchange for not only consumer goods, but also some kind of technology, equipment, and so on, without any serious restrictions for ruling elite. But already crisis of 2009 showed that such model is not stable, and all these reserves accumulated before could be not enough to support economy in bad times. Also, oil prices cannot not only rise but also can decline quite significantly, and also this dependence on Europe on supply of Russian energy sources will decrease over time. It was the reason for this modernization attempt in the period of Medvedev presidency, with creation of new innovation support mechanisms like Skolkovo, some incentives for investment, also with some attempts to restrict violent pressure on business, and also with some reforms of bureaucracy. Yeah. It was also the time of reset of US-Russia relations after this war with Georgia, after all these tensions with Ukraine. And also it was the time of WTO session, finally, after very, very long negotiations. Important point here, in my view, is that even after these tensions with West also started in 2004, and actually 2004 is important not only in terms of this internal conflict between oligarchs and top-level bureaucracy, but also in terms of some changes in relations with Western countries, especially after these cold revolutions. Because Kremlin started to be very suspicious about any support of such kind of democratic movement in neighbor countries by Western governments. But nevertheless, even after this famous speech of Putin in Munich in 2007, in my view, Russian elite, and it is about all groups, including not only oligarchs, of course, but also top-level bureaucracy and even about Siloviki. They were consider Russia as part of global economy, and they would like to be part of global elite. Yes, they were not welcome to the club, and they recognized it after 2004, for instance. Yeah, but the idea was that Russia can have enough power, not only in economic terms, but also maybe in military terms, and West finally should respect Russia. Yeah? And therefore, Russia will be, Russia it's in general, and especially Russian elite, will be in this global club. And with all Russian specificity, in my opinion, it was quite in line with the logic of this state-permeated market economics model. But a new turning point here, was related to political protest of 2011, 2012. And in my view, maybe not these protests themselves were important, but especially the consequences of Arab Spring, with some personal stories of Gaddafi, Mubarak, and so on. And this situation created a real fear of catastrophic scenarios in top Russian elite. With Newsweek, not only in foreign policy, but also in the economy. What I have in mind here, especially after 2012, it was clearly one of key priority to lower dependence on external environment. It was not only about economy, it was also about all aspects, including this fighting against foreign agents, and so on. At the same time, government and Kremlin tried to lower social tensions. And for instance, it was in the form of direct transfers to important social groups. And very impressive example here is always my decrees of 2012. We can say separately about the implementation of these decrees, but the idea, in my view, was exactly to provide necessary compensations for broader social groups, which could represent social base for regime. Also, we could observe exactly from this time period some higher pressure on elites, first of all on bureaucracy, with idea to increase efficiency of governance system. And it's first of all about anti-corruption campaign with arrests of high-level officials, with some changes in regional elites, and with some kind of request, especially for new regional governors and so on, to some other people in elites, not only for loyalty, but also for some competence. As a result, we can see increase in operational efficiency of the system. And maybe it can be a point for discussion with Vladimir. Yeah, we talked about it already, I think, in Bremen 2 or 3 weeks ago. Because yes, for instance, if we will talk about COVID pandemic, yeah, on one hand, Russia demonstrated much higher level of excessive mortality. But at the same time, in my view, for Kremlin, a key point was not about keeping lives, but about keeping economy. And this decentralization of authority in March 2020, just after introduction of this coronavirus restrictions, with idea to shift responsibility and actually also authority to regional governments, created interesting phenomena of much higher flexibility in implementation of policy. And finally, it led to much better economic outcomes, especially comparing to initial expectations, because initial expectations in the spring of 2020 was about approximately 6 or even 7% decline of GDP for this year. Finally, it was only 2.5% decline. It was much lower comparing to Germany, US, and many other countries. And in my view, it was done exactly due to a higher level of efficiency at low and middle level of this governance system. Again, it is not about decline of corruption in the system in general, because this corruption, first of all, is linked to the activity of top-level people, and they are not restricted. But I would say maybe about some kind of changes in the system in terms of some shift from decentralized to centralized model of corruption, according to this paper of Schleifer and Vishny, published in '93. So there are also some other examples like this Industrial Development Fund, some substitution projects. But important point, if we will talk again about results, that it was practically no economic growth after 2012. Some average growth rate was below 1% annual. And there is a question to which economic model it can be related. All these specific things, which could be absorbed in last decade. And here I would make some reference to 2 stories. Yeah, first one is about some ideas proposed and developed by Sports Club already in 2012, and concerning this think tank, very conservative, yeah, It was created in autumn of 2012 with support of some people from presidential administration. As I know, it was especially by Volodin, exactly with idea to provide some alternative. Because before, in my view, all policy in 90s, in early 2000s, in late 2000s, were driven by some kind of vision of future in heads of top representatives of Russian elite. Yes, it was some changes in this vision of future, but they had some idea about future. The problem of 2011-2012 was that on one hand, yes, it was, for instance, the strategy 2020 elaborated by HSE and RANEPA on the request of Putin in 2011. But after the protest of 2011, it became clear that yes, some proposals from the strategy can be implemented partially, yeah, in some sectors or some regions and so on. But overall idea of liberal market economy or even coordinated market economy could not be accepted already more for top elite. Exactly due to this real fear of any liberalization, which can lead to some scenarios of Arab Spring and some personal stories like Gaddafi, Mubarak, and so on. So, and therefore, it was some demand for alternative vision of future. And yes, they invited these people like Kalashnikov. I think Dugin was not a member of this club at this time point, but he was not from far. Yeah. So I think it was also Glaziev and some other similar people. Yeah. Prokhonov. Yeah. They prepared very shortly, I think in 1 or 2 months, first report about this measure, recourse strategy. It was published already in January 2013. It was interesting. It was done both in Russian and English. Yeah. And key ideas of this report was about Third World War in 5-7 years. And this war will be initiated by global financial oligarchy against major developing countries, including Russia, first of all. And it was not any serious arguments why it was so. It was simply some kind of thesis. Yeah. And it was another thesis, second thesis, about the opportunities to implement a mobilization strategy, with some references to Stalin, Peter Begretin, and so on. And after that, it was some concrete ideas how it can be done. Yeah. Again, in 2013, even by people from presidential administration, it was considered as really very marginal, especially because such kind of vision of future was not very pleasant, not only for ordinary people, and not only for business, but even for these people in ruling elite. It was maybe too much. Yeah, I will finish now. Yeah, but now we are in really in such scenario, and it is only during 10 years. Another example about Iran, and in 2017, it was the time of some kind of best economic performance of Iran after very deep economic decline during many decades and so on. And academic delegation from Iran visited Moscow with series of presentation about their economic model. And we visited also HSE, and they told many things about successful experience of Iran, which was capable to keep its own political regime and its own economy under all pressure of all enemies and so on. So, with idea to show that it is some kind of specific economic model, and it can be used maybe successfully by our countries and so on. But here you can see official data of World Bank about Iran. Yes, in 2017, it was some kind of success comparing to previous years. But in 2017, Iran could only reach the GDP per capita level of 1979. So they lost 40 years. And afterward, it was again a new decline. Yeah. Okay, two final slides. It is some kind of overall picture concerning the situation of Russian economy before February of this year. And a key point, in my view, is that in any case, in 90s, in 2000s, under all these differences in economic strategy, Russian, and also under all these rent-seeking strategies, opportunistic behavior, and so on, at least at the level of declarations, yeah, no, and maybe partially they try to really think about these things, yeah. Russian ruling elite told about development. It was not successful, but at least they tried to do it. Starting from 2012, it was nothing about development. It was mostly about security in broader sense, and about keeping their positions, keeping their borders, keeping their assets, but not about development. And from this point of view, this model, in any case, cannot compete with liberal market economies, coordinated market economies, or state-permeated market economies. And therefore, in my view, before February of this year, only two scenarios were probable. One, with some kind of long-term stagnation, without serious external or internal shocks. And another one, and actually it is worst scenario, with some internal or external shocks. It will be simply some kind of collapse of this model in quite short time period. And after February of this year, we are exactly in this scenario. And here, in my opinion, only some comparison with Iran is possible. But I try to stress here two important differences with Iran, because Iran, again, with all this economic decline, could survive. It was not very successful, but nevertheless, it was so, yeah. But important differences here are following. First of all, and maybe I will start from last one, it is about ideology. Because, yes, Islamic leaders of Iran, starting from Khomeini, provided some vision of future for the country, uniting elites and also ordinary people, at least in first decades after the revolution. And it was especially important during this Iran-Iraq war and so on. And Russian elite could not create any clear ideology and any clear vision of future, both for ordinary people and for elites. Second point is about economic dimension. Iran could survive finally because they started to isolate itself from global economy at a very early stage of current wave of globalization. And at this time point, not only Iran, but practically all countries were much more autonomous and much less dependent on global markets. And it was, of course, under these conditions, Iran didn't gain from globalization at all. Yeah. But they could keep control on their economy and could survive. Yeah, at quite low technological level, quite low living standards and so on. But Russia is very different because already in the 90s, Russian economy became extremely open, with quite serious, also negative consequences in terms of very deep economic decline and so on. But Russia benefited a lot in 2000s and even 2010s. Exactly due to this integration in global markets. First of all, in terms of access to foreign technologies, foreign equipment, and exactly due to this access, we could observe not only increase in GDP, but also increase in productivity. But now, exactly the most advanced sectors of Russian economy are highly dependent on this supply of equipment, components, and more general technology. And therefore, actually, I don't see any other outcome like collapse of this existing model, and actually quite soon. No, of course, maybe it is not tomorrow, and maybe not in 3 months, but it is, in my view, only as maximum about some years. Yeah, and even if you talk about USSR, yeah, some other example, USSR from the very beginning was created exactly as some fortress. Again, it was very isolated from the very beginning, and exactly due to this reason, it could exist for decades, but finally collapsed. So, no, it may be a very final point. Even Russia, even if Russia could survive after this inevitable, very deep economic and political crisis, there is very high uncertainty about next model, because these two attempts with liberal economic model, with state-permeated market economy, can create quite deep dissatisfaction among elites, among people. Maybe it could be an attempt to create a coordinated market economy model, I don't know. But it will depend highly some success of this attempt, yeah. But it will depend on the quality of Russian elite, future Russian elite. So I will stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, thank you, Andrei, for your excellent presentation and for presenting some sort of framework for analysis of Russian capitalism in a comparative perspective. I would suggest those who are online, please send your questions and comments to the chat, and Andrei will be able to respond to these questions and comments. And in order to start the discussion, I will make a comment regarding the title of the presentation, yeah, or subtitle, which model did Russia choose? And in my view, the major problem with this choice was a sort of freedom of choice, which Russian elites had in the 1990s and in the 2000s and after 2012. That they attempted to choose what would better suit their own self-interest. And I would say that probably it's very natural behavior. Everyone make a choice based on perceptions of his or her own self-interest. What was different in case of Russia that there were no major constraints for this choice, either international constraints like the case of South Korea you mentioned, or some sort of domestic constraints because of certain domestic tensions and the like. And this, in my view, is a sharp difference between Russia and many other countries. Many other countries simply had no choice. They doomed to be, say, dependent market economies because of the size of the economies and not much opportunities to make some sort of strategic choices. But my understanding is that it's somewhat misleading choice. People pursue their own self-interest at the expense of prospects for the country. Would you like to go back with the slides?
Sorry.
How to proceed with that?
Okay.
Yeah, it's here.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
So I just wonder if you may put the issue of these choices into perspective of your analysis. Probably the very fact that Russian elites had a choice was well, some sort of driver toward a negative direction.
Okay, first of all, thank you for the question. Yeah, it's very relevant. Yes, I think you are right that if we will talk about successful cases of catch-up development, yes, ruling elites in relevant countries faced much stronger pressure. It's true, yeah. But I would stress that maybe your final point about something no choice, yeah, situation is not fully correct, because yes, we know success stories. First of all, yeah, we are thinking about them, but it was a huge number of failures, and strong external or internal pressure and hard constraints, very important. But quality of elites also is important, because only under pressure, only pressure is not enough. Under pressure, even under pressure, yeah, under strong pressure, relevant actors can make right or wrong decisions, and can select one or another strategy. For instance, if we will talk about even Soviet Union, yeah, Soviet Union in late 80s already was under quite strong pressure, yeah. But the quality of elite inherited from late Soviet regime under Brezhnev, in my view, was much worse, for instance, comparing to the quality of elite inherited by Deng Xiaoping, yeah, from previous regime in China. No, again, I'm grateful for your question, but in my view, in any case, even under all this importance of pressure from outside and from inside, relevant elite actors can make their own choice. But of course, under higher pressure, the spectrum of his choice can be more limited. Yeah.